So I got this question on one of my most recent video, and they were just asking, should I take the same course that you took? Should I have the military pay for med school? And it really comes down to five different things. One, am I okay with service in the U.S. military? If you're not, you probably wouldn't watch this video. But, whatever. Number two is it safe to serve in the U.S. military as a physician? Am I going to get hurt, wounded, blown up? Number three, is the money that I save on med school going to simply be lost on my salary? How do the salaries between military doctors and civilian doctors compare? Number four, what's the residency situation like? How's graduate medical education in the military compared to graduate medical education in the civilian world? And lastly, number five, what's the lifestyle like? Am I going to be moving every year, every 2 years? Are my kids' lives going to be uprooted? Are we going to live in miserable, rundown southern United States towns that no one wants to live in? How is the lifestyle? What can I expect?
First is the moral ethical dilemma of military service for the United States. There are some people who will never want to serve in the United States military just for what it represents. Past wars and aggressions, the brutal genocide of Native Americans and expulsion from their tribal territories. Yeah, I went there. I went all the way back there. Vietnam War, invasion of Panama, invasion of Iraq, attack on Libya, they're all kind of problematic. There's a long list of questionable actions that may lead you to say, no thanks. But there are a few reasons why you shouldn't worry about that too much. See, military service members are placed in harm's way and are involved in missions of questionable morality because the civilian leadership places them there, not because they choose that particular mission or action. The vast majority of service members volunteered with pure intentions, not fully understanding how inappropriate some of the military interventions actually are. As a doctor, you will be caring for those people, and that's honorable all by itself, regardless of how the president or the civilian leaders choose to use the military option. The mighty U.S. military machine will push forward regardless of whether you decide to serve or not. So in that sense, you might as well do what benefits you the most personally. So another question is, will I get hurt during military service? Or what is the likelihood that I'm going to be injured, wounded, caught in a blast? And I would tell you this, it is very, very unlikely that any physical harm will come to you as a result of your military service. The truth is that would be the case if you were a truck driver, an explosive expert, or a standard infantryman. Most people in the military never actually make contact with the enemy, and most are never fired upon regardless of what they do. Of course, in the case of World War III, maybe that's going to be different, but for most of the conflicts the United States has been in, most people don't see the enemy. Doctors spend the majority of their time in rear elements that are not in direct contact with the enemy. In the Navy and Air Force, it is extremely unlikely that you will be located in a setting other than a very large base. In the Army, you can find yourself moving around the battlefield and in unsecured areas. It's possible to become the target of a convoy, ambush, or IEDs. But many of the doctors who end up in these situations volunteer to do that sort of thing. It's extremely unlikely that you will be integrated into battlefield action without you deliberately seeking it out. The exception to this general trend of safetiness would be the following. As you may be aware, the drone technology is rapidly improving. The next war will see American service members attacked anywhere and everywhere with accurate and powerful weapons that are being controlled by a human, much like this footage you see here of soldiers in Ukraine, Russians being killed by small drones. The U.S. is aggressively developing countermeasures to neutralize these weapons, both improvised and advanced, but they will become the biggest threat during our next war. Doctors and anyone serving well behind the front lines will find themselves threatened by these kinds of weapons. So next, is the free tuition counterbalanced by the salary difference between a civilian and a military doctor? So first, let's talk about the cost of med school. The average in-state tuition over 4 years is $210,000, and the average out-of-state tuition over 4 years is $260,000. The Princeton Review estimates that the annual living expenses for a medical student is about $27,000. In whichever branch you choose, the U.S. military will cover the entire expense, as well as books, lab equipment like stethoscopes, otoscopes, and thermoscopes. They also pay for a monthly stipend for living expenses, which is around $2,700. So you can see that from a debt/expense perspective, the scholarship is definitely a good deal. Now, if you go into primary care, that's like family medicine, pediatrics, internal medicine, or adult medicine, The U.S. military is almost hands down the more lucrative option. You'll spend nothing on your education, you'll get paid more during residency, and your post residency pay will be comparable. If you go into surgery, well, it becomes harder to make the call. I would say of the orthopedic surgeons that I knew, most of them actually did stay until retirement. Only a few of them left the service early. And that is despite the fact that military ortho maxes out around 270 to 280,000, while civilian ortho salaries are around 6 to 700,000, with spine surgeons making $1 million. However, the military salary comes with a retirement at the end, and many civilian jobs do not, as you will change many hospitals over time. If you invest and save well as a civilian doctor, I think you could make the case that you're still doing better than the military. If you look at that, the years saved, so let's say you only do 10 years of service, that 10 years difference, you could easily make the millions of dollars that you will make in pension down the line. However, unexpected things happen. And a military retirement is a nice thing to have in order to ensure that your family is going to be okay. It also includes the health care for you and your spouse for life. So if you were to develop something like cancer or a very costly medical condition, these things have drained people's fortunes in the past. If you have a military retirement, the military will cover the medical bills. Now, one aspect of a military medical career that I forgot to mention is that in general, you don't really work quite as hard as the civilians. Sure, you're going to get deployed at some point, and you'll have to stay in some level of physical shape, but your work hours, day to day, generally aren't as bad as most doctors. This opens up the opportunity to do moonlighting, which would increase your pay. Many of the surgeons will work extra call shifts on the weekend, maybe not every weekend, but, a few weekends a month. This can result in a large sum of money. It would be very hard for me to estimate by specialty and location, but just know that there's ways to make extra money and you can make a decent amount. So now, a very, very important question is, what will my graduate education be like? Graduate medical education is a fancy word for internship, residency, and fellowship. Internship is the first year after med school. Residency follows internship, but in a lot of cases, the two of them are packaged in the same kind of group. Fellowship, which is the 1 to 3 year program that follow residencies, allow you to further specialize. If you do a surgical residency, fellowship is usually 1 to 2 years. If you do a 3-year non-surgical residency like internal medicine, pediatrics, family medicine, oftentimes a fellowship will be 3 years. The Army makes almost every specialty available to you straight out of medical school. The only exception that comes to mind is the plastic surgery residency. You can do plastic surgery fellowship after general surgery, ENT, or ortho, but you usually can't go straight into plastic surgery in the military, as far as I know. It's possible that's changed. I don't know. If somebody knows, tell me in the comments. All specialties are a go, even pediatrics, despite the fact that children are not actually allowed to serve in the military. You're just there to take care of service members' children. Residencies in the military take place in military hospitals, and this generally means that they have smaller and more limited referral base. There tends to be a lower variety in the range and severity of disease that you might see in these hospitals compared to civilian institutions. But the U.S. Army balances that out by setting up outside rotations with civilian hospitals to give you a broad range of exposures to patient ages, injuries, disease, and surgical treatments. They ensure that you have a balanced experience. So generally, the fact that you're not seeing a huge range of variety is okay. They'll send you out to another hospital to get that experience. Now, once you have completed residency, you may go straight to fellowship, but not everyone does. You have the option of going straight into practice in your specialty, and then applying to fellowship years down the line after you've gotten comfortable not being in residency. You'll be paid your military salary while in both residency and fellowship. So how does a residency salary stack up? Well, if you have no prior experience, then you will be O3, which is a captain with less than 2 years of service. Now, according to this chart, that means you'll be getting paid about $5,102 a month. Added to this will be some sort of random allowances like BAS and BAH. This will give you another $2,500 to $3,500 a month, depending on where in the nation you actually live. And so you can see that you'll be making around $8,500 a month, which is more than $100,000 annually in residency. Your civilian counterparts will make $64,000 annually. So this translates to about $5,250 per month. So once again, you'll be in better shape for medical school. You'll be getting all your bills paid. And now in residency, you'll be getting paid more. So you can see that's two situations that the military option is giving you more money. Now, lastly, how is the military lifestyle? And the answer is it can be wonderful or it can be kind of. U.S. military bases are all over the globe. I was sent to Hawaii initially. I stayed for 7 years. And then I went to Italy for 3 years. My family and I traveled all over Europe on cheap flights and in our family vehicle. Beaches in Malta, skiing in Switzerland, hiking in Scotland. It was a really good time. After Europe, I got sent to Washington, D.C., which is my home of record. I was sent to the best places that the U.S. military has to offer. But you can mess around and do a residency at Fort Hood, followed by a duty station at Fort Irwin, and then Fort Polk or Fort Drum. So any of my military people understand that these are not happy places. These are not places I ever wanted to be. So it can go a lot of different ways, and you really don't know how it's going to go down until they tell you this is where you're going. So now the other thing is you might find yourself moving every 3 to 4 years. If you take an overseas assignment, that's going to be 3 years. It's probably not going to be longer, and it's probably not going to be shorter. It's going to be 3 years overseas and then, back home. Military doctors tend to have more control over their PCS schedule than the average military officer, however. But you can still get moved around quite a bit, especially if you start to climb into the higher ranks. As you would probably guess, this can be disruptive to your children's experiences with schoolmates and their general sense of belonging to a hometown. Now, my father was in the military until I was 10, and honestly, I was devastated when we left Scott Air Force Base when I was 7 years old. That's when we moved to Maryland. He was assigned to Bowling Air Force Base. And sometimes I think about how different my life would have been if my dad continued to move throughout elementary, middle, and high school. But instead, we stayed because he got out. And I grew up with the same people. I was in the second grade with the same people that I was in the 12th grade with. I still know these people, and it's been a very important part of my life that we did not keep moving. So that is something to consider. Another interesting thing about the military is that you can get about as military as you want to get, or you can basically be military in name only. Now, you can go to parachuting schools, survival schools, you can even join a special forces unit. You don't even have to be that tough because, they know that doctors in general aren't going to be tough and they don't expect you to. But, if you want to get tough, they can send you to a couple schools to get tougher. Okay? Yeah, a lot of times they'll just settle for a guy who can walk like 4 miles without falling over. It's almost inevitable that at some point in the practice of medicine, you're going to get a little bit bored. And the military has a ton of options for you to explore leadership experiences or do research or take some of those assignments I was talking about where you're working for special forces units and things like that. Once you do 20 years, you can retire and immediately start collecting your pension. For me, that's age 46. Or if you don't want to do 20 years straight because you just can't stand to be around it that long, you can do 10 to 12 years and then transfer to the reserves to do the rest. Now, when that happens, generally, you still have to wait until age 65 to collect your pension or something like that. That's as far as I understand it. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. So, in summary, from military scholarship to officer pay and residency to the military pension, the HPSP scholarship and 20-year military career is a very, very good option to set yourself up for minimal debt and maximum savings over a lifetime. So unless you're vehemently opposed to military service, I would strongly consider this option for your medical education. But if you were in that category, you probably wouldn't watch the video. Now, you might find it strange that my very first video that I ever made on this channel was me in my uniform, talking about how I had my career destroyed in the U.S. military, and that is true. So then, now I'm telling you, oh yeah, you should go do the same thing. You might find that odd, but you shouldn't. The reason being, what happened to me is not uncommon, and it happens to black people in and out of the military at similar rates. So just because it happened to me doesn't mean it will happen to you. In fact, I'm going to do a video in the future to explain kind of the variables I've identified as contributing to when it will happen and when it won't, and how you can kind of minimize the chances of it happening to you. So I would never tell you to go into residency expecting that to happen, but I would tell you to be prepared for something like that. And the truth is, it's just as likely in the military as it is outside the military. So, with that said, why not go into the military where there's a better safety net? When this happened to me, I was able to recover. And the entire time I was recovering, I didn't have to look for a job or wonder where my money was going to come from, which I talk to people on an almost monthly basis who are doing exactly that. They've had their residency destroyed and they have no idea where their money is going to come from. You don't have that problem in the military. Additionally, the one video I made about Lieutenant General Talita Crossland making these new adjustments to how residencies are handled when they try to terminate someone, it means that now, as of now, this month, or whenever the policy officially goes in, the U.S. military is a much more fair and just organization than the rest of the country with regards to dealing with residencies. And that, by itself, is a good reason to consider it as an option. Well, I thank you guys for listening, and let me know what you think.